there's an idea that you have a species appropriate diet, right? Like most species eat certain foods and they don't eat other foods, and they've
Hmm.
evolved in that way to be able to do that.
Hmm.
But at the same time, people are different. And so it makes things like nutrition be really tricky because, like, what is the variance? What is the delta for how different are we? Like, are
Mm.
we, carnivores on this side and vegans on this side? Or is it like we're mostly omnivores and we lean one way or the other? It
Mm.
makes it really tricky to know, who is that person that ginger is going to affect really negatively versus, somebody who can have it with impunity. It seems to be fine. So what have
Hmm.
you learned over the years, had to unlearn about bioindividuality, and how do you help, the people that you coach and you work with understand that they need to do some experimentation to try to figure that out?
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Well, you said it really well there, and that is, look, we're all this genetic cornucopia that we're not the same. It's like a fingerprint, and it even goes further than that. Although it's very difficult to study. Not only is your genetic material and my genetic material different, and so from a nutrition perspective, we might have to feed ourselves differently to get the most out of ourselves. There might be some similarities, but there's also some differences, right? On top of that, we have our microbiome, which is all of the genetic material in and on us that isn't us, right? And that's a result of the things we've eaten in the past. Maybe even we have research related to childhood trauma and the difference in microbiome 30 years later in life versus somebody who hasn't experienced childhood trauma. That's crazy town to me. But in addition, you also have the effect of traveling. So if I travel to Mexico, for instance, I'm going to pick up some pieces of the microbiome there, and I'm going to bring it back to Arkansas. Whereas if I've never done any traveling, I'm not going to have any of the experience of microbiomes from other places, right? So all that to say, our microbiome and our genetic material can affect the way that we process nutrients, the way that we respond from an immune perspective to foods, and then also in the speed at which we recover from things, and all of those variations, we haven't even scratched the surface of how to process that in an external way. In other words, there's not an app for it. You can't do a fingerprint and a poop test and for the app to go, aha, because of your genes and your microbiome, here is the foods you should eat that would be best for you. And we're getting closer and closer with the advent of certain AI technologies and how well we've mapped the genome and how we're starting to correlate that with specific research. But the way that I describe this for my clients is twofold. One, the best indication of what is good for you is to start by knowing what you're eating now. So as rudimentary as it might sound, we're going to become aware and start gathering data by keeping a food journal. And so that's what we do. Like, what do we eat this week, right? And then second, our goal is to improve that every single week. We're going to improve the amount of protein that we're consuming and see how that works with our digestive tract. We're going to improve the quality of our food, moving away from hyper-processed garbage, and see how that affects the way we feel and the way we respond. We're going to change the composition of the fats that we consume and see how our body fat responds, and also how cognitively ready we feel for the day. We might shift. We might have a fasting day in there where we're going to experiment with going without food for a time and letting our body heal and seeing what happens when we reintroduce food like that. And this might sound a lot of trial and error. It's because you're your own experiment. since there's no external source that can simulate Casey or simulate Alex or simulate the listener or watcher of this. You're the only thing that can simulate the response. You're the only thing that can run the experiment, and it's a process. That's why I always like to call it learning to feed yourself well.
Yeah, dude, I love that. And it's so funny. I don't think I've ever really, thought about this, but you mentioned travel. Like, yes, we're in a unique time where, you don't need to get in a boat and maybe survive and maybe not over the course of, several months to get to a certain destination. You can jump on a plane and go anywhere you want. That
Absolutely.
works both ways though, because you can also in Arkansas go to your grocery store and you can buy an avocado from Mexico that is not, that didn't come from that time or place. You can buy star fruit that came from Brazil. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's food interacting with a global transport system that also changes the equation.
100%. Yep.
Wow.
Yep. And as a I would say unhappy byproduct of that, we have a lot of things that we add to our foods now to decrease how quickly they decompose that also affect the microbiome. So my avocado from Mexico might not actually be introducing new microbiota to my life because of whatever it's been sprayed with to keep it from deteriorating in the process, right? And so that's a real issue. It's a real issue that not only am I exposed to a bunch of different food items that, you know, if I was native to Arkansas, I would never have access to, but I'm also getting all of the different pesticides and fungicides and fertilizer and all those things that I might not have been exposed to either. It's a very interesting space. It's very at the moment, it's almost impossible to predict how all of these things affect our microbiome.
Yeah, good call. On that note, do you know how old, on average, according to an article I've read, that seems to be confirmed? Do you know how old an apple is by the time you get it at the store?
I imagine it's very surprising, but no, I don't.
It's very surprising. It's over a year. They call them in the industry, they call them birthday apples because they're over a year old when they're picked. I think I saw it was 14 months.
Oh my
That's
gosh.
bananas.
Yeah, that and if you walk into an apple orchard and you walk down the row and there's an apple on the ground, 4 days later it's been eaten. You know, like
Oh,
it's got worms in it, it's decomposing and stuff. So it's not normal for an apple to be a year old.
yeah. Yeah, totally. I've had fresh picked fruit in my neighborhood and it sits on the countertop. We keep our house cool. And like, dude, within 2 days, that thing is like shriveled up to nothing. Like it goes
Gone.
bad so fast. Yeah, totally. Anyway, okay, so what is your like starting point for most people? What are some of the core concepts you like to recommend as far as the nutrient density that you already mentioned? But like, what are some of the things that you want somebody to create that base? And then, like you said, week by week, we're going to get a little better and a little better. We're going to
Mm-hmm.
refine things. What are some of the things that you really try to start with?
I imagine your listeners are not foreign to these ideas because knowing you and also knowing the quality of the interviews that you do, I imagine they've heard these before. But if you're just starting with your nutrition program, the foundation for improving actually comes from understanding thermodynamics. And so I'm going to be simple and complicated at the same time, or at least do my best here, because in the nutrition world we have this proliferated lie about body composition and health, that everything's just calories in and calories out. And it's a useful mechanism, and there's pieces of it rooted in science, but at the same time it's not a complete picture. And so I'd ask you and your listeners to think for a second, what is the similarity between my body and a car? I know it sounds dumb, but think about it. Like, what's the similarity between my body and a car? And you might think things like, my body and a car both run on fuel, right? My body and a car both need to be able to operate to get from point A to point B. And so this idea of calorie intake and calorie burning in the nutrition world that boils all of our foods down to just calories treats our bodies like cars for not a bad reason. That's energy, makes sense. But then we ask, what's the difference? What's the difference between my body and a car? And there's a few, notably that I'm a biological system and a car is not. But the major difference between a body and a car is that the fuel that comes into the car, so that it can get from point A to point B, is not what the car is built out of. What I eat becomes me over time. So when I consume food, not only is my body going to use that food for energy, but my body's also going to take the food that I consume and then take little molecules and pieces of that food and incorporate it into the new version of me. So like if I hold up my fingers here, we know that on average, 7 years from now, every molecule in these fingers will be a different molecule, meaning they're still my fingers, but they're built out of what I've consumed over the last 7 years. And so with that said, one of the things that I want my clients to incorporate into their dietary practice is I want them to understand what is worth building myself out of. What is a good building block for the man or woman that I am working to become. Like what's worth building myself out of. And from a macronutrient perspective, that's where we get this carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. This is where we get this very, very important dichotomy. And that's this. If on one end of the spectrum I have proteins, and if on the other end of the spectrum I have carbs, and in the middle I have fats, proteins are my building blocks. I build myself out of them. Every cell, every fiber, every enzyme requires proteins. Fats, in the same way, they are both structural and energetic. So they can be in the middle of the spectrum. Your body requires fats to build new cell membranes. Your body requires fats to build hormones. Your body requires fats to keep the myelin sheath healthy in your nervous system, right? So that's in the middle. And on the other end, you have carbohydrates, and those are really just energetic. They're never structurally incorporated into the body. And in that way, protein and fats are essential. You can live without carbohydrates. And so what I want people to get foundationally in their nutrition is, let's get the building blocks right. Let's eat high quality proteins and enough of them. Let's eat high quality fats and enough of them. And then when we're talking about the energy side of things, sure, you could have higher quality, higher nutrient density carbohydrates in your life, but it's a moot point in my mind if your foundation sucks. If you're building yourself out of garbage on a regular basis, the energy that you're intaking isn't going to affect your livelihood. So very simply, I like to start with the quality of the proteins and fats and the quantity of the proteins and fats in a diet, and then I like to build from there.